throughout the morning. He is president and CEO of the Mississippi Economic Council. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Richard.
Good to be with you. Big day.
It is a big day, and we're glad you're with us.
Thank you. It is good to be here. My first trip to Hobnob, and I was asking you earlier how many people, and you said kind of the standard answer is 1,000 or so will kind of come and go, but big crowd, and this is something that's on the calendar for folks in Mississippi every year.
It is. This is our 23rd year, and we used to do it at the Ag Museum out in had a big tent, and we kind of had that big tent mentality. Mm-hmm. So we, for those that are older, remember that the Coliseum used to have, I think, yellow and orange siding and looked like a big circus tent anyway. So
it absolutely did.
We moved in here because we had 3 consecutive years with inclement weather that caused us to move inside, and we just said, let's just keep doing it. And since that time, so we transformed the Coliseum floor to really a large meeting space. But what you'll see today more than anything else is the space where we are that's open, and others is where most people just stand around, talk, gather, and hobnob. I mean, the name is perfect for what we do. So it does make the Coliseum look a little different. First time I ever came here, I think I came for a basketball game, but this is really a neat setup the way it's done, and we really always have fun coming in here.
I have been here for basketball games. I've seen my alma mater both lose and win a state championship game in this building years ago. I most recently was here for a dance competition. So a lot of purposes.
Very versatile.
I mean, this was the big house for me growing up, and so a little more formal with Mississippi Coliseum.
As an old sports writer, you always look forward to that.
That's right.
That the week that everybody shows up at the big house for basketball.
No doubt. No doubt. What's on the menu today? A lot of speakers. Do you think there's going to be a central theme, a central topic?
You never know, because in some cases that you just don't know I know a couple of speakers have a couple of things they're really kind of focusing their attention on that we'll probably hear about. You'll probably get a little bit of politicking, particularly as it relates to the upcoming election. As people are supporting one candidate or the other. The candidate side of things, the political side of things, is U.S. Senator Roger Wicker, who is running for re-election as a Republican nominee, will be speaking along with the Democratic challenger, Ty Pinkins. So we always mix a little bit in that. But I'm really excited about the panel, and I think we talked about this last week, is the leadership panel that, Leadership Mississippi is celebrating its 50th year. This is MEC's 75th year. It's Leadership's 50th. And really and truly, it's a great opportunity for people to hear about it, recognize it. I would venture to say probably a third to maybe even a few more than that will be in the audience are probably Leadership Mississippi alums. We've got over 1,500 people that have gone through that, and I think we have over 1,000 active alumni that we can reach out to. So it's really a great program and an opportunity, and applications are currently being accepted for this year's class. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then just a few updates. Brad White is going to come in, and we're going to talk a little bit about transportation. That's been an issue that we spent a great deal of time on with last week. That's very important to us. So I think we've just got a nice variety of what we're doing, but again, it's the opportunity for our statewide elected officials to come in and kind of talk about what's going on in their departments, and we're looking forward to that.
This is a 3-hour program. Haley Barber is going to join us in the 8 o'clock hour. I'd love to have 3 hours with him. A few years ago, I moderated an event that he was the guest speaker. It was kind of a Q&A, and I mean, you want to talk about a man with stories to tell. I mean, there are as many stories as there possibly could be, and they're all captivating. He is a great storyteller, in addition to being someone who's been successful at basically every level of politics, and was one of those graduates of Leadership Mississippi that you were talking about.
Very, very much so. It's interesting when we put that panel together. Of course, we've got some great panelists on it as well. But we were putting the timing in. I'm like, is this enough time? No, it's not. Whatever we put in is not going to be enough time.
Not going to be enough.
But it really will be, I think, a fun event overall. And I think just we try to provide enough variety with the programming to keep people interested. And then around noon, we will these curtains behind you will lift up, and will be great buffet lines. For
the food setup looked fantastic, even with no food over there
it's
earlier.
a lot of fun.
We'll tease this, and we might get into it a little bit later, less than a minute left, but we struggle sometimes to live in the moment, right? Okay, let's just enjoy where we are right now. It's hard not to look ahead to a couple of years from now and the political season that is on the horizon in Mississippi, and know that we may have one coming up like we haven't seen in a long time with some of the races.
With some of the races coming up in the statewide elections, it's definitely going to be that way. And I think there was some conversation about that. I was listening to something that didn't matter whenever this presidential election is over. In 2 hours, they'll start talking about the next one. The same thing happened in Mississippi last year.
That's right.
As soon as the election was over, everybody started speculating who's running in 2027.
It's going to be wild. It's a little ways away still, but it should be fun. Scott, we'll talk to you in a little while.
You bet.
7 o'clock hour coming up next. It's the Gallo Radio Show. Coming to you from inside a building that has seen many, many events through the years in Mississippi, whether it's basketball, state championships, dance competitions, rodeos, flea markets, and everything in between. From the Mississippi Coliseum, this is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. Hobnob 2024, an event put on by Mississippi Economic Council. This is the 23rd annual event. And in addition to Scott Waller, who technically was our first guest, we've got a great lineup coming for you. The Lieutenant Governor, Delbert Hosemann, will join us in just a little while, as will the Speaker of the House, Jason White. Former Governor Haley Barbour will stop by later this morning. But we start things off with the Commissioner of Agriculture and Commerce in Mississippi, Commissioner Andy Gibson. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Richard. It's great to be here inside the beautiful, renovated Mississippi Coliseum, and we'll have Mistletoe Marketplace in here next week, and the whole trademark, but we're glad to have Hobnob. It's going to be another great day. Always enjoy it and look forward to the lunch right afterward.
I meant this in the most complimentary way possible. I said this earlier this morning. If Commissioner of Agriculture in Mississippi were a movie role, they pulled you straight out of central casting when they put you in. The cowboy boots are not fake. The cowboy hat is not fake. It's real. It's just that's kind of how you roll.
Well, it is, and I enjoy this job. I love it. I love to promote Mississippi. That's my number one focus: promoting our products, agriculture, and commerce, making sure commerce keeps flowing. And in addition to that, we get to have a role in all these great events that you talk about. Yeah. Hobnob is no exception, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say today as we're planning ahead for the upcoming legislative session. But even more importantly, Election Day next Tuesday.
5 days.
5 days away, November the 5th. I tell you what, it's a huge day in the life of our country.
So last time we talked, you were in your pickup truck. Did you come in your garbage truck this morning?
I don't have a garbage truck, but I love the idea. I mean, Donald Trump pulled that one. He played that one just right. I imagine there'll be a lot of people wearing those orange vests leading up to Election Day. But
well, I mean, just like a Halloween costume that just gets dropped in your lap.
Yeah.
Like if you're not a person that does Halloween very well, and you're like, I got to have a costume for tonight.
Yeah.
You put on a pair of blue suit pants, a white shirt, a tie, and throw on a reflective vest, and now it's perfect.
And it's not every day, that half the country gets called garbage by the sitting president. But it is what it is. I'm proud to be a Trump supporter. I've been traveling this state at different rallies and get out the vote events. I was in DeSoto County earlier this week and been on the coast, been all over the state. And the energy is here for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Looking forward to Tuesday, but we got to get out and vote.
Commissioner Gibson, let's talk about a serious issue. It's something that we touched on when we visited a couple of weeks ago leading into the fair. It's something that you're going to talk about today in your visit, and that is the really difficult time that exists right now for farmers across the country, but we're focused specifically on farmers in Mississippi. Costs have spiraled out of control.
Right.
Prices have been okay, but they certainly haven't kept up with the rising cost. And that's everything, right? That's fuel, that's equipment, that's seed, it's fertilizer, it's aerial needs that you have on the farms with spraying. Everything has gotten more expensive, and prices just haven't kept up. And this profession that is so important, so vital, so noble, has been a big deal for hundreds of years. It's in trouble.
Agriculture is in trouble. It is in trouble due to a variety of factors. Inflation, you just mentioned, being only one of them. And that inflation coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic has never gone away. And other businesses are able to pass those costs along to consumers. Farmers are the only ones who can't do that. You show up with your product, here it is, whatever the market pays, it pays. And, for example, just this year, fixed costs for farmers to raise a crop went up 30%. At the same time that prices for grain have gone down. And there's a lot of factors for that. We have actually grain still that has not been sold by Mississippi farmers or American farmers that's sitting in warehouses, it's sitting in grain bins, not been sold yet, waiting for better prices, but those prices have only gotten worse. So I'm hearing this is a national issue. It's not just a state issue. It is a national issue, and they're predicting that at the end of this harvest season, we have a lot of farmers who are nearing retirement age. In Mississippi, over half the farmers are nearly retirement age. And, I've been asking the question, and we all should, who's going to keep these farms going? Well, a lot of these farmers are to the point it's not profitable. So I heard a report this week that we might have as many as 140,000 farms that just stop production this coming.
Nationwide?
Nationwide. That's huge. It's
a huge issue.
It's a huge issue, and it's a food supply issue also. I don't want people to miss that. It is a huge issue for us long term. Short term, it's a crisis. Long term, we're actually in a food supply Cold War with other nations around the world, China being one of them.
All right, so it is sometimes easy to identify problems, and this is a massive problem. We hadn't even talked about land costs, right? I mean, you've seen private equity groups, you've seen international groups come in and have bought up large chunks of lands, and they just turn around and lease them back. But again, lease prices at such that you can't keep up. So
solar farms, there you go, another one.
Yeah,
paying 6 times what the value of that farm is.
So if we identify the problem, then we've got to figure out a solution. We've got to figure out a way forward. Mm-hmm. From where you sit, what do you see as a potential solution? What could be a remedy beyond just government aid to get you through? I mean, farmers have for a long time have relied on the Farm Bill, relied on government programs to help them in times of disaster and times of shortfall. But as opposed to just a government bailout of farmers, what's the solution?
Well, I think for one thing, we do have a financial industry that is very aware of these issues. I've heard from different banking groups, and unlike the 1980s when we had the last major crisis like this, I think a lot of bankers are going to find a way to work with farmers, if possible, to keep this thing going. Right now, you mentioned the Farm Bill. I mean, that's the number one thing that can be done. Congress could.
We don't have one in place right now, right?
That's right. Congress allowed it to expire. At no fault of our great delegation, our senators and congressmen have been fighting. So of course, Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, Senator Roger Wicker fighting for the Farm Bill in the Senate. In the House, Representative Trent Kelly and Michael Guest and Mike Ezell have all been fighting for that. Kelly introduced a bill to kind of a stopgap measure this past week. But we can't even get Congress to pass a farm bill because of the internal dispute between Democrats who are wanting to make it all food stamps and welfare, basically, and Republicans who just want to keep the farms operational. So we don't have. So
those two issues are rolled into the farm bill. You have the need-based.
SNAP,
welfare program.
Welfare, all the above. The Democrats made that part and parcel of the Farm Bill decades ago, and now the majorities are so slim in the House, for example, you can't get a bill out. Despite very good efforts to do that, Congress was unable to pass it, and it expired, actually, earlier this month. So we're sitting here with one of my comments today is a total uncertainty for the future of farming. Another disincentive for any farmers who could go to the House to keep farming. So this is a lot of different factors at one time. Interest rates are sky high, to try to get a loan to keep things going. This is it's a crisis. Talking to Farm Bureau yesterday about it, the day before. This is a crisis that's been looming. It's been simmering, but now under the Biden-Harris administration, it's about to come to fruition in a way that we haven't seen since the 70s or 80s.
There has to be a solution, though, because we can't afford to stop producing food.
That's right. And so I think, USDA and it is a federal agency, a huge federal agency. They've been tasked by Congress to try to implement different aspects of the Farm Bill, price supports and so forth. But all that could be part of a Farm Bill or some stopgap measure to keep these farms from going under. But I want to emphasize to our listeners out there, this is the largest part of Mississippi's economy. People may not realize that Mississippi agriculture is the number one driver of our economy. It's also the number one employer in the state of Mississippi. 17% of our workforce is engaged in agriculture directly or indirectly. So it's important for the country. It's important for our food supply, but it's critical also for Mississippi. There are some bright spots. We can talk about some of those later on, but I'll mention some of those. One opportunity that we have is at the same time that the West is drying up and burning up, they're losing their water. Mm-hmm. California has always been our powerhouse ag producer, produce and so forth. It's drying up and burning up. All of that's shifting to the southeastern United States. I'll present a slide today to prove that, a slide that shows our water resources may be our biggest asset in the state of Mississippi for the future of our people and for our country. And I'm going to spend the next 3 years of my life fighting for the farmers, fighting for agriculture, and for the future of our food supply for our state and for all of our people.
It is a worthy fight. There's no doubt about that.
Yep.
Yeah, some of the decisions that they've made in California as it pertains to the water supply have kind of come back to haunt them.
They've closed it off, and now they're losing food production.
Yeah.
It's a crisis. We'll face it, and we'll persevere. Farmers persevere no matter what. We're going to get it done.
Ag and Commerce Commissioner Andy Gibson, always a pleasure to visit. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate you.
Good to see you. This is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. We're back with you right after this. Radar for Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann. He's got a lot on his plate as well, and he joins us this morning as we broadcast live from the MEC's Hobnob. We are at the Mississippi Coliseum. Lieutenant Governor, good to see you this morning.
Oh, it's good to see you this morning.
It's been a while. Certainly glad to be with you. I know this is a dangerous question to ask someone who works
Let's start
in politics. If I give you an open-ended kind of what's on the docket, but I'm curious. It's gone quickly. We're nearing the end of 2023, which means of 2024 rather, which means the new session is just around the corner. I know the work never stops. There is not an off season per se for the legislature. But in terms of a to-do list, in terms of things that if you got a stack of papers on your desk, what's on the top of that stack right now?
Well, we have several. And you're right about that. We're having our hearings now, our committee hearings, and they're all live streamed now since I came to be the lieutenant governor. Since they hired me, we live stream everything, and we've had
a little sunshine.
Yeah, I think it's good, and also people actually watch that stuff, and then it's archived where they can go back and look and see what somebody said or how they voted. But we got our state fiscal policy group coming up this next week. That's Senator Harkins and Senator Briggs Hobson, and they're talking about legislative recommendations under the tax structure, credits, bonds, bond capacity, diversions, budget, economic issues, those kinds of things. And that'll be the first of a couple probably where we look at the whole structure of income and expenses in the state. And leading us up under Senator Johnson's committee that met last week, leading us up to looking at the state of Mississippi, how it functions and how we can most be receptive to what the needs of taxpayers are to work with the government. And that involves a lot of things. We've got a lot of boards and commissions, as everybody probably knows, about 200 of them now.
That's a lot of meetings.
I know, and I'm skeptical about the necessity of some of those. But in any event, we'll be tackling those as well. We've got a labor force participation group, which, as you know, we're at 54%. We got to get where our people are working here and making sure they've got meaningful economic life. We've got some issues in schools that are really bothering me. Cell phone usage. I've been reading a good bit about that, and I anticipate some legislation there and working with Lance Evans at the Department of Education about not having cell phones in class.
Let's pause right there just for a second.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating topic, and I mean I know if you rank all of these in terms of importance, maybe that's not at the top of the list, but you got a lot of people listening right now that either have children or grandchildren. And I think most recognize that these, which are vital, right? I mean, we probably can't function without our phones, but there are also problems that are related to those. C-Spire's been a great friend of mine and a great friend of SuperTalks for a long time, and they recognize that as well and have put controls in, have tried to highlight some of the importance of that.
Well, there are a couple of things. There's Anxious Generation, which is one of the books I've read about this, and I encourage any mom and dad out there to do that. But in that, it points out that our young women have chronic issues with this, depression issues, and so do our young men, and they've skyrocketed since the start of that cell phone that you have in your hand. So the connection between cell phone and some mental health issues among our children are important. And also very important to me is the fact that when you're watching your cell phone in class, you're not learning. You're supposed to be learning, whatever the topic is that they're trying to educate you with. Our teachers are, and they have repeatedly told me that this is a distraction. There's bullying that comes out of this. There's all kinds of other issues, and I've been from Ripley to Van Cleve, which is down in Jackson County, and all the schools, Murrah, Brookhaven, Hattiesburg, all these other schools, speaking with both teachers and principals about what do we do with this. And I think uniformly they're going to ban and want to ban cell phones, at least during education periods. Some of them are banning them.
Just period.
Period. You come in
Can't
the
walk
front
in the door.
You put them in your locker, and that's the end of that. And I think those determinations are best made on a local level. But I will tell you for clear, we do not want cell phones any further available during an education period.
There is, or there seems to be, initially pushback from school-age children on this idea. What do you mean you're taking away my phone? How am I going to connect with my friends? And then once they get back past the initial pushback, have actually admitted that it has created better relationships with friends, maybe a little bit less pressure, and we've seen grades that have ticked up a little bit as well.
Let me tell you, do you want a relationship with your fellow man or woman, or do you want a relationship with a green dot on a screen?
Yeah.
These kids need to have the social skills that are going to be effective when they get out of that school. They're going to go to work with somebody. They're going to have to interact with people. They're going to have to convince you that my opinion is right and yours is not as good, or whatever involved in all of the things, conflict resolution. We don't need our kids to be shooting each other. Some of them are shooting each other.
Yeah.
We need for them to be able to talk. That's a lot less expensive and certainly better health for everybody. So you really have to remember that these cell phones are not human. They're like great for communication, as you said, great knowledge in there. AI now is going to spawn this further.
Yeah.
We have probably the largest AI in the country is being built right here in Madison County. So we're part of that generation. But that doesn't mean that we ruin our education skills or our social skills to do that.
Well, and I feel like we have to walk this line, right? We don't want to be the old man yelling at a cloud, oh, we got to get rid of these cell phones. And yet at the same time, we can look at it and say, okay, there is a time and there is a place, but we got to be a little more responsible, because I'm as guilty as anybody. My wife will tell you that. I mean, pick it up. This first thing I do. First thing I do, wake up in the morning, pick up my phone.
I ask all of you at Thanksgiving dinner, if you have teenage kids that are going to be lucky enough that they'll sit at the table with you, look at what they're doing. They're looking at their cell phone and wondering what time they're going to get out of there so they can go to Wendy's or whatever. So I will tell you that is a balance that we have gotten out of whack in my Warren County definition. So we've got out of whack with this, and we need to come back to some level. Certainly in the education period. After school, obviously, we don't have any control over that. Other than we're working on content, just like you talked about, what can be given to young people and what's available to them.
Yeah, there's some stuff online that certainly scares you, especially if you're thinking about children that are at an impressionable age.
And I'll tell you another one while we're talking about schools. I have a serious issue with absenteeism. After COVID, for some reason, our kids didn't come back to school. We went to 28% absentee rate in public schools in Mississippi. That was staggering to me. It's now running about 22 or 23%. But basically, we're 1 in every 4 children is not back in school. And when we did that, obviously those 1 in 4, we're not worried about their cell phone. We're worried about them not being in the seat. So I've started going to all of these schools. How can we get our kids back in school? And you'll see we're going to expand our career coaches this year to make it, an incentive for them to learn and whatnot and have a career going forward. But we're also going to expand our truancy officers, which we were lacking on. Their compensation level was poor. You couldn't get anybody to do that. Who wants to go knock on a door and ask mom or dad, why is your kid not in school? Here?
Yeah.
So we've been meeting in good schools. I mean, B schools and A schools. They're running 22, 19, 20. I started by giving an award. I like the carrot better, actually. So I gave an award to all the schools that had 15% or less, like we used to have. There were about 170 out of 847 schools. So only 20% of them have 15% or less. So I would encourage, and I have been spoke yesterday to young men and women that were with Lance Evans on his education group from all over Mississippi. And I told them to ask, when somebody's not in school, ask your friend why he didn't come. We were looking forward to having you. Why didn't you come participate with us? Why are you not coming here? We always want you to be here. To make it inclusive, and in Van Cleve they started a group of young kids that's elected by the children just to talk to kids about either this depression or whatever, or about why they're not coming to school. Why are you not coming to school? Some of them are taking care of ill parents. There's single homes there. There could be economic issues. There are other issues we may have to deal with. But this problem, by not being there, we are penalizing them for a lifetime, not a day's absentee.
Yeah.
They'll never be able to get back in the workforce or have an economic life or anything else. So you'll see a good bit of work, I think, in that area, as well as infrastructure. We've spent a lot of money on it.
You got a few minutes to hang with us?
I always have time. I mean, I'm a state employee.
Can we clip that? Can we be sure that we've got that cut to use again at some point? Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann visiting with us. We will tackle the economic side, at least for a few minutes, on the other side of this break coming up. Got Lance in the studio. We're broadcasting live from Hobnob here at the Mississippi Coliseum. We remind you that this hour of the Gallo Show is brought to you by MWG Employer Services. Running a business is tough, and if you're struggling with HR, benefits, and payroll, you are not alone. That's where MWG Employer Services comes in. They provide a full range of employer services and a custom plan that fits just you. Give them a call today, 601-206-7966, or go to MWGEmployerServices.com. More of the Gallo Radio Show coming up after this on SuperTalk Mississippi. I tell you another day it is. It is Hobnob Day. We are at the Mississippi Coliseum. Hobnob, put together by the Mississippi Economic Council, leaders from all over the state of Mississippi, and some who would like to be leaders will be here visiting and listening to a great panel. Our conversation with Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann continues right now. Generous with his time this morning. So let's switch gears. We talked a lot about schools. That's a conversation that could go on for a really, really long time. There are, I don't know if you know this or not, but there are a couple of other issues that seem to be hot-button issues.
Okay.
Perhaps you've heard about income tax and a debate on how that should be handled.
Yeah.
Revenues and how those should be distributed. And then there is I'm not speaking about you in particular, but there is an issue that I think a lot of elected officials are scared to tackle, and that is the retirement system in Mississippi and funding for that. And people, it's one of those things where we don't really want to talk about it. We kind of know that it's an issue, and can this go on forever? And we think about that at the federal level, but it's also like this thing that we kind of are better off not talking about a little bit as well.
You want to take them from the top, or
let's start with income tax. It's a great debate.
On the income tax side, we've been blessed in Mississippi to do two things that involve the income tax. First, we keep cutting it. And
right.
We cut out a bracket, a 5% bracket. We started lowering it from 5 to 4.7, 4.4, 4%. And at 4%, we'll be like the 6th or 7th lowest tax state states that charge taxes. So we'll continue that. It's no secret for at least the last 2 years I've been talking about lowering the grocery tax. I want to do that this year. The other side of that, of course, is our debt, and we've been blessed. We paid off $1.2 billion in debt.
Let me interrupt just a second. How much revenue comes from the grocery tax as it exists right now?
Well,
roughly.
It's roughly about 6 I'd say in the $80 to $90 million per percentage point. So we're at 7%. So it's about $630 million. It would cost us. It would cost us about $60 million to cut it per percentage. The total sales I'm talking about.
Right.
Percentage. But to reduce the grocery tax would cost us between $60 and $70 million per point. So if we went from 7 to 6, it would be $60 or $70 million less, and the same down. So it's not nearly what the income tax cuts are like. We cut over $500 million out of the income tax, and that was 1 percentage point.
It's rare that my wife and I go to the grocery store together. We did that last week. Just kind of happened that way. And we were walking out. I mean, the grocery bill is ridiculous. And I was like, feels like you shouldn't have to pay taxes on groceries. I mean, just very conversational, not looking at the numbers or anything like that.
Well, that's a good point to bring up, because Mississippi has really these 3 or 4-legged stool that we tax on. We tax some income, we tax some grocery tax, we tax the use tax or sales tax, same thing. So those 3 really produce most of our revenue. There are gaming taxes and other odds and ends, but that's where most of the money comes from, those 3 legs. And I think,
and then all property taxes are local, right?
And property taxes are local, and they're set by the Board of Supervisors, and we don't touch those.
Right.
So I think that's been very healthy for us to spread around the tax liability some and have everybody pay some and whatnot. I think we're out of whack on our grocery tax, and I'm hopeful that'll be reduced this year. Paying down debt is a long-term thing, and I think during my 8 years I have here, if we continue to go, we'll pay off $2 billion of state's debt, which is almost half of it, a little bit less than half of the total state's debt.
Is that a healthy position? To only be carrying about $2 to $4 billion in terms of debt?
It's going to come back to the next question, which is by being able to pay off our debt, just like your credit card at home. If you don't have any expenses on your credit card, well, you can spend more money on other things, whatever lifestyles you'd have. In Mississippi, it's a protection for us. We have $700 million in our rainy day fund. We have $400 million in our fund down on the coast for hurricanes, and then we still have significant cash balance in the Treasury right now. This month, we actually would be about $30 million less than budget, but it fluctuates back and forth. But by having us be nimble about our debt service, by actually during good times paying off our credit card or parts of our credit card, that gives us room to do what else? We're $25 billion, according to our PERS committee, short. $25 billion short on our pension liability. So if we're going to pay off that, well, we figured out 4% interest on $25 billion is that's $1 billion a year.
Yeah. Just
that expense. And I personally have taken this position from the beginning. We are not going to cut the retirees back from their 3% or their 13th check or whatever you call it now. We're not going to cut retiree benefits, and we're not going to cut retirement benefits for people who are working for the state now. Now, we've shrunk the size of state government from about 26,000 employees to 23,000 employees. But then we got education, then we got other things that are going on. Look, it sounds like
we got a mic check going on, too.
Yeah, it sounds like they're warming up over there. But that position that you're bringing about PERS is a significant monetary issue. And by having less debt and having more nimble to be able to pay larger amounts in there, we have to address that this year. And
I had a conversation with someone just yesterday about that 13th check and what that means to retirees. I mean, there are a lot of people who work in state employment jobs, whether you're talking about teachers or anything else across the board, who sacrifice
100%.
some in their earning years,
absolutely,
because of the payoff in retirement years.
Yeah, they worked as a teacher for $20-something thousand a year, and they have earned that 13th check, and I have no intention of cutting it back.
Right.
I don't think first of all, I don't think it's illegal, and then second of all, I'm sure it's not moral. We have an obligation. We need to pay it. And I think the Board of Trustees has recognized that, and they've asked for a 5th tier, and they're making some proposals now to make sure that the next tier is actuarially sound, or where it, not spending more than it has to. But I think that's real important for the legislature to look at this year and follow the lead of the Board of Trustees. But there's 2 absolute no's in there, and we're not cutting anybody's benefit, and we're not cutting any state employees' benefit.
And I just want to address one message. We got a bunch of messages on the C Spire text line, 601-879-4395. Kind of hard to work some of these in, but there's a person who said another attack on PERS, it never ends. No, that's quite the opposite of what Lieutenant Governor Hosemann is talking about. I think he said it about as clearly as he possibly could with regard to retirement benefits. We've only got 3 minutes left. Speaker of the House White, who's going to join me in the next hour, is very much publicly for the elimination of income tax, and he looks at this issue one way. You look at it a different way. What is the biggest difference in the way that the two of you look at the very same issue, period?
Well, first is the amount. It's $1.6 billion. I would love to have an income tax-free state. I don't want anybody to pay any taxes if you ask me that.
Right.
But we have to balance a budget. We have to educate our children, build our infrastructure. We spent over $1 billion on new roads, Highway 7, 15, Interstate 20, 55,
Sure.
Interstate 10 on the coast. All of those roads that we're building. We've increased our teacher education budget. There are a number of things. We paid off our debt and whatnot. So I don't think we're spending our money unwisely. I want to continue. We are eliminating the income tax 4/10, 3/10 at a time, and I want to continue to do that over the lifetime. We actually we're on schedule to eliminate the income tax faster than was proposed by the House 2 or 3 years ago, because we're cutting it 3 and 4/10 a year. Back then, they wanted to raise the sales tax 2.5% to 9.5%. I didn't do that. The Senate didn't do that. We didn't raise anybody's taxes. Instead, by gradually eliminating the income tax every year, 3/10, 4/10, really, if you look at it during the next 10 years, we'll be just about an income tax free. So,
is there a middle ground that you and Speaker White can come to with regard to income taxes?
Well, you'd have to ask him that. But to me, the gradual reduction of the income tax and elimination really at a speed as equal to or faster than was proposed by the House 2 years ago is a good idea. Eliminating it tomorrow would be a $1.6 billion hole in the budget. And so that's not financially viable.
So to do that, you've either got to increase revenues or spend less somewhere else, right? I mean, if you take $1.6 billion out of the budget to cover that $1.6 billion, you've either got to increase revenue somewhere else, or you've got to spend less to make up for that $1.6 billion, right?
Yes, you'd have to either borrow it. You could borrow $1.6 billion and then mortgage the future of the state. You could do that. $1.6 billion a year. Every year you just borrow that money, and of course, eventually the state would go broke. So we are continuing to increase the inflation is causing an increase, and we're still continuing to get an increase. The fact that the federal government gave us a whole bunch of money the last few years is not going to continue on. So I would tell you that the normal project where we pay off our debt and we reduce our income taxes, we'll eliminate the income tax over the next 10 or 12 years at the pace that we're going.
It's almost like a tortoise in the hare argument.
It's not a tortoise in the hare. It's realistic. Well, you don't have $1.6 billion. There's no way to raise that.
But the tortoise is steady. Just keeps plugging, and then you get
the tortoise is running $500 million a year. Plus, we're eliminating $40 million, $200 million a year of business tax. Now we're fixing to do $120 million worth of grocery tax.
So it's a tortoise on roller skates.
Yeah, it's running about.
Let me tell you, tortoise with a V8 in the back end.
At the end of my term, you hired me for, we'll have reduced taxes $1 billion a year.
Thank you so much for your time.
Good to see you, man.
Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann.
Thank you.
Conversation. Scott Waller joins us again, President and CEO of the Mississippi Economic Council. Hobnob starting to wake up a little bit. Folks kind of making their way in.
We're getting everything, the final touches on the morning, and people are beginning to mill in, and so we're excited. It's going to be a fun day.
There was a press release earlier this week that had a lot of words in it, and we're gonna take some of those words off of that sheet of paper and let you explain. There are 3 kind of major entities within the Mississippi business community, and the 3 entities have worked pretty well together, but there is now a plan in place to really combine the efforts to make this a more all-encompassing organization that takes care of business, that's involved in lobbying, involved in the political structure. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let you explain it more clearly.
Where we are, we're in the process of really taking a serious look at is it possible to bring these groups together kind of as a single organization. We're
talking about MEC, MMA, Mississippi Manufacturers Association.
And BIPEC. And BIPEC is the Business and Industry political education committee. They do the political scorecard, legislative scorecard, and things of that nature.
Okay.
But yes, you are correct. We have been very fortunate, particularly in the last few years. We work very well together. We've really tried to combine our efforts when we could on specific legislation to make sure there's an understanding of why this is important to the business community. And I think a lot of people, what I want people to understand is the Mississippi Economic Council is actually the state chamber of commerce. We are a private, not-for-profit organization. We're not a state agency. We're funded solely by our members. Well, the Mississippi Manufacturing Association is a membership organization also, as is BIPEC. So when you think about our business community in the state, how do we best serve those? And in conversations with the leadership at those two organizations, we really started thinking about what does the future look like. You know, today our theme for our Hobnob, our theme throughout this year is going to be work future. And what we mean by that is how are we making the future work for us? So when we think about the future of our state, how do we really better serve our members? How do we better serve the business community? And then ultimately, how does that create a better Mississippi and a stronger economy in our state? So when you think about the ability to work together and what we've been able to accomplish is three individual organizations over the last 2 or 3 years in particular, if you really bring all those sources together and really focus on it. So over the next year, we're going to look very closely and very carefully at what that might look like. We're going to look at everything from organizational structure to staffing to, all of the things that an organization would need to look at and to make a determination. Is this best for not only the organizations that are involved, but more importantly, is this best for the members who support those organizations? And ultimately, is it best for the state to have a single organization that is focused on a strong business economy? There are 29 states across the country that the work that these individual entities in Mississippi do, they do as a single organization.
Collectively.
So they're collectively. So we've got a really great way of benchmarking this with other states. We've already done some of that with some site visits to a couple of locations across the country, looking at how their operations are set up. So we announced this on Tuesday for two reasons. One is our leadership within our organizations are all aware and talking about and have essentially passed a resolution to allow the leadership to move forward with this process. That's number one. Number two, it's not an overnight process. So we wanted to make sure people understood when they hear this is happening, well, this is happening next week. No, it's 2026 is our goal.
Okay.
And what we will do at that point is determine how it all looks. I'm very excited about where this is going. I'm very excited about being part of this process and being part of the future of this. But what that role may be, that's to be determined.
Scott,
so we're excited.
Let me ask you this. We got a minute until the break. What does the combining of these three groups give you the ability to do collectively that you can't do individually?
Number one, it's a better use of our members' resources because we have a lot of duplicate members. A lot of members that are supporters of MEC support the other two organizations.
Okay.
So it combines those resources in a way. Secondly, being a single organization, we can be much more effective because then we're working hand in hand every step of the way to determine not only the vision we want to take as it relates to policy, but more importantly, in advocating for that policy. It becomes a lot more when you have a single business entity speaking for the business community. It really
so
it really
a focused
will work.
effort as opposed to maybe overlapping efforts in some
exactly.
in
That's
some
a good
cases.
that's a good way of putting it. Yes.
Yeah. Scott Waller, he is the president and CEO of Mississippi Economic Council. 8 o'clock hour just around the corner. We are going to visit with the Speaker of the House, Jason White. Slightly different viewpoint than Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann has on some of the things. We'll get into those issues. Also, former Governor Haley Barbour. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for being with us. As we broadcast live from Hobnob, Scott, we'll talk to you at the end of the show.
You bet.
Thanks so much. More coming up. It's the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi from the Mississippi Coliseum, Hobnob 2024. Hi. Richard Cross, Lance in the studio. He's the one spinning the records. So
he's doing a good job, Richard. He took me back down memory lane. Those were Saturday morning days. That's before your time, Richard.
I don't know if it is or not. I don't know. Speaker of the House, Jason White, joining us. And you may have heard some of the conversation that we had with Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann. Both of you are smart guys, and yet you look at a common issue through what seems to be a very, very different lens.
On which issue?
Well, I mean, That's fair. I was talking specifically about state income tax, which seems to be such a big conversation. So let's put a placeholder there. We'll come back to that in a second. You hosted a legislative forum a couple of months ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, here in the Jackson area. A lot of people from a lot of different states came in, a lot of different perspectives, big attendance. What was the goal there?
The goal there was no predetermined goal, but here, I tell folks when they say, Jason, why do y'all keep talking about tax cuts? Why do you keep talking about cutting taxes, cutting the personal income tax? A couple of reasons. Number one, it's good for business. It's good for economic prosperity in our state. It's good to attract folks from other places in our country. But number two, we continue to run $1 billion surplus. Third year in a row, projections are we will run almost $1 billion surplus again this year. So of the tax money that you send to Jackson, you're sending almost $8 billion. We're spending a little under $7 billion. In other words, there's $1 billion left over. Now, you might say, well, you're not funding this adequately in our state government. What most folks are saying, and with Republicans in control in most places who claim to be conservatives, the thought process is let's get rid of the tax on work. Now, we made huge steps in 2022, and the Lieutenant Governor was part of that. That was a House plan and bill, and certainly the genesis of it came from the House and Philip Gunn and Trey Lamar. But we did cut it to where Mississippi, as states that have an income tax, we are about 8th or 7th best in the country. We will be a 4% flat tax at full phase-in another year and a half through 26. We're still phasing in that 2022 tax cut that takes us down to a 4% flat tax state.
Okay.
That still generates almost $2 billion of state revenue, if you will, that we fund state government with. So if there is somebody called it a trick, or if there's magic, or if there is, the thing is, how are you going to buy that down, if you will? Now, our state has traditionally grown at least 3% in revenues every year. You can take a 20-year average, 30 or 40-year average. That equates on a $7 billion budget to over $200 million. You could just simply buy it down through growth over an 8 to 10-year period with a trigger. And that's the way most national economists say to do it.
So you are not and haven't advocated for let's wipe this out tomorrow. It has to be incremental.
It has to be incremental. That's a smart business way to do it. We're here, what's going to be a gathering today of the state's business community. No guy or girl running their business would just say, hey, let's just eliminate this line of revenue and see how it works out for us. We're going to focus on other.
But the Lieutenant Governor says that's his view also, right? And that it's an incremental reduction of the state income tax.
I don't know, Richard. I'm not being critical of the Lieutenant Governor of the Senate, but they've never come forward with tax cut plans. Those come from the House, and so you'll see that again this session. I think they are interested in slightly cutting the grocery tax, and that's not off the table for us too.
Sure.
We want to eliminate the personal income tax in a reasonable, conservative, with a business-minded approach. And we think we can do that. And lots of people smarter than me have told us you can, and here's how to do it. We've looked at states that didn't do it right and found themselves with big problems in funding state government. Nobody wants to do that.
Well, Trey Lamar and I talked about this a few weeks ago, and he kind of laid out the plan in the fact that it is incremental, and here's the money that's going to cover it. I guess one of the questions is, does that money – are there places where that money needs to be spent other than eliminating the income tax, or are we saying, no, the most important thing is to eliminate the income tax, but then you have other things that don't get funded maybe at the same level they could or should?
We've looked closely in this process, that forum that you mentioned, our Public Policy Summit, looking at tax reform. We also specifically looked at how we fund our infrastructure, roads and bridges. We do need a better and a more dedicated stream of revenue so that MDOT can plan as we look at our highway system. We're still running we're running a 2024 highway system on a 1987 highway plan.
Yeah.
With a flat tax on 18 cents a gallon on that. So we're looking at that.
To me, that's one of the most obvious places. You bump the gas tax, and I know everybody kind of cringes when you hear raising taxes a little bit, but is that accepted a little bit more because it is a usage tax?
It's a use tax. If you're on the roads, you pay the tax. Now, we simply, I think, what we should have done in '87 is put it on an index where it just grows with inflation slightly, and we would be fine if you backed up to '87 and put that 18.5 cents on an index and just looked at it, what history would have done to it. We would be about $350 million more going to highways this year, which is about what they say that. Well, Brad White at MDOT says they could spend $400 to $500, but seriously,
annually,
he is a conservative, and yes, annually, more than what we're spending now. But looking at it, we can do so much with another $250 to $300 million going to MDOT. So we're going to look closely at that. For us, that's a little bit of a separate issue because that is recurring, and that is one place where conservatives and most taxpayers, we spent a lot of money polling this summer, Mississippians on issues. That was the one place they didn't mind their money being spent on was on roads and bridges.
So the interesting thing to me, because if we're being honest, roads and bridges are not the sexiest way to spend money. It's like it's like buying a mattress.
That's right.
Nobody wants to go buy a mattress, and yet you use a mattress every single day of your life, and you're like, okay, I need a mattress. So it's not necessarily the you say word sexiest way to spend money, and yet most people, or I think a lot of people, don't think about how roads and bridges and infrastructure are tied to economic growth with businesses that you're attracting, and those have to kind of go hand in hand, don't they?
Yes. Besides site readiness and having that piece of property where that company is looking to locate, besides having it ready to go, shovel ready, like infrastructure in place from sewer, gas, electricity, all those things, rail, highway access, that infrastructure piece is the next biggest piece that they evaluate when they're looking at how they're going to get their product or get their people to work. That is absent the site itself. That is the next biggest thing.
Yeah.
So we feel like those are worthy goals. We'll see where we get.
Yeah. Couple of minutes left. It's hard to believe tomorrow's the first day of November, which means you got November, December, and then like 3 days until you guys go back into session. In terms of a to-do list, what are items 1, 2, 3 on your list going into a new session?
For us, certainly tax reform and those issues we just talked about. Our Republican caucus will meet here in a couple of weeks and kind of whittle down the thing. There's 79 of us, and that's a lot of cats, Richard, to get together and try to get everybody on the same.
There are a few opinions, right?
Just a few. And remember, every one of them, 24,000 Mississippians sent them to the Capitol to represent them, and they've got their ideas, and they're all valuable, and everybody's vote is equal in our Republican caucus. But we're going to look close at tax reform and the smart, best way to do that and do what we can do, which the governor, I would add, is very supportive, and I have figured out around this place. When you need two people for it. You need the House, Senate, and governor. You need two of those three for an issue for it to pass. We have the House and the governor. He's very supportive. We'll see where we get with the Senate on that issue. We're going to also continue to look very closely at health care access for low-income Mississippians. House passed a bill this past session. We couldn't get it across the finish line in the Senate. We kind of drifted apart in where we were on that issue.
Yeah.
That issue's coming back. It's here before us. It's one of the last pieces of the economic puzzle we need to fit to have our economy positioned to grow.
Put you on the spot. I should have done this with the lieutenant governor as well. I think we should have an hour dedicated to the Gallo Show where both of you are on together, and we just hash this income tax thing out, the three of us. We'll just sit down. We'll have an open forum. Alex, I'm sure, I don't know where she is. She can schedule that. You on board?
She's a good scheduler. Well, I'll tell you this. We'll be head to head January the 5th or 6th until the
but I mean an open conversation so that everybody can understand.
We'd welcome that. I think he likes it. Lieutenant Governor's a tax lawyer, but
he is.
So is Trey Lamar. So I'll give you that. Tit for tat on that.
Well, if we let Trey come, then we got to bring out somebody else on the lieutenant governor's side. It might get complicated.
I'd be glad to meet with him. He knows where we are on these issues, and I think I understand where they are.
Great day today for Mississippi here at Hobnob. Opportunity to visit with a lot of colleagues and a lot of business leaders. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thanks for being here.
So great to see you.
Yes, sir.
Speaker of the House, Jason White. This is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. Got a treat for you coming up next. Former Governor Haley Barbour will join us. We're back right after this. And we are joined now by former Governor Haley Barbour. Hobnob. This is not the first time that you have been to Hobnob, but a great event that brings a lot of good people together in Mississippi.
I've been doing it a long time, and I've been coming for a long time.
Understand that. Your career, I don't know if you remember this or not. There were a few years ago you spoke or were a guest at an event in Oxford. It was kind of a Q&A set up with a local Republican group, and I got to be the moderator on that. It was one of the greatest nights of storytelling that I can ever remember. You have absolutely lived a life in the world of politics, from Yazoo City to Jackson to Washington, D.C., and all points in between.
Richard, it's interesting. I grew up in a family law firm. My dad died when I was 2, but he was a lawyer. His father was a lawyer. His brother was a lawyer. One of my brothers was a lawyer, first cousin. That was the law firm. And I just thought that's what I'd end up doing, go home, try to be the best lawyer in Yazoo City. And just interestingly, my oldest brother got elected mayor of Yazoo City.
Okay.
He was a Republican. He tried to run as a Republican, but in 1968, the Republicans didn't have a line on the ballot. So that's how few Republicans there were.
The whole local politics in Mississippi, it certainly has changed pretty dramatically.
Yeah, well, it really has. And Jeppy, my brother, was the 3rd Republican mayor in the state.
Wow.
Laurel, Columbus, and Yazoo City were the only 3. And 6% of Mississippians in the first poll I ever saw identified as Republicans.
6%?
6. And I ran 30 counties for Nixon in the campaign in '68, and we did great. We got 14. And that was,
wow.
Of course, George Wallace. It was George Wallace who beat us, not Hubert Humphrey. And so that's all. I tell people I ran for president of the student body at Ole Miss in 1968 that spring and got beat, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because if I had won, I couldn't have accepted a job working for Nixon, which led to me being the state director of the census and executive director of the state party and political director of the White House. Lord works in mysterious ways.
Some of your greatest stories come from your time with Ronald Reagan, if I remember correctly.
Well, Ronald Reagan was a great president, B, a great man. He always treated people like they were his peers, even though he knew they were not his peers.
Right.
But he treated everybody courteously, and he wouldn't recognize some of the political stuff that goes on today.
Well, the vilification of the opposite side, regardless whether you're Republican or Democrat, I mean, it's kind of an ugly scene, and yet Ronald Reagan had the ability, with his delivery and with his words, to deliver a little bit of a jab that was in fun, but also landed its intended point, and then could shake hands and walk away at the same time.
Well, no question, and it wasn't just Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall, which was incredibly powerful to the Russians. And because within a year or two, they tore down the wall.
Let me ask you, so that's not a shoot from the hip comment from former President Reagan. What had happened leading up to that speech for him to stand and be emboldened to say, when he said that, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall?
There was already some inklings of people wanting to get out of the Soviet Union. You remember the Polish Pope, and he very much wanted to Poland to get out of the Soviet Union, but Reagan had pushed for successfully a missile program and system in Europe to protect them against the Russians, where they wouldn't be afraid of the Russians because they had
missile defense system.
That's right. And also regional missiles.
So offensive capabilities as well.
That's right. And he believed the Cold War was a war, but he believed it could be fought without a lot of casualties. And you look at his 8 years, there was hardly anything like that. But Reagan's character came out. In the White House, at least when Reagan was there, and I think probably every president, the president never meets with anybody by himself. Usually there's a staff person from the White House, and usually there's a staff person from the person he's meeting with.
Sure.
So a lot of times, because of my job, I was political director, I would sit in the meetings with Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, and Chris Matthews, who you see on television.
Right.
He was always in there for Tip. Well, but Reagan and Tip would have Tip would have a glass of beer, and Reagan would have a glass of wine, two old Irishmen, and they would tell stories for a while and laugh, and then they'd get down to what was the business at hand. And the greatest example I'll ever remember of what happened was we met over what became the 86 tax bill.
Okay.
But this was in 85, and Reagan said that he thought it was really time to do this, and Tip was kind of non-committal. When Reagan announced the tax bill on television, of course, the Democrats were given the opportunity to respond. And Tip had the chairman of the Committee of Jurisdiction, whose name was Danny Rostenkowski. He was a Chicago Daily Democrat, tough as nails. And what was the first thing out of Danny Rostenkowski's mouth? We're for tax reform, too.
Oh, really?
That the first words out of his mouth were, we're for tax reform, too. We don't agree with the president on everything, but you deserve tax reform. We're going to try to make sure you get it, and we'll work together to do it. Can you imagine that today?
I don't think that you could get today's climate to say we're for Santa Claus too. I mean, it's like, hey, we're just going to draw a line in the sand. It's incredible.
Well, it is, and it's bad. It's not. It weakens us internationally, and I don't know if you saw the report. There's a national commission on national security that meets every 4 years, and it issued their report this year and said we're in the worst position in terms of national security since 1941, since before World War II.
Wow.
And these are guys that are experts.
Sure. After the break, I would love to get some of your insights on the presidential campaign, as we're just 5 days away. I might issue you a challenge as well. I might get you to put your political director hat back on and assume a Trump victory and give me some cabinet positions that you would put in if we get there. But before we do that, we got 2 minutes of the break. I want to go to the point in your career when you decided, I'm coming back home, I want to be the governor of Mississippi. What got you to that point mentally?
I had run for senator against Senator Stennis in 1982 and lost, and candidly didn't think I'd ever run for anything again, but I stayed active in party politics. I got elected national party chairman in 93, 97. But candidly, I thought the Fordyce's successor, I just thought he was taking the state in the wrong direction, particularly financially. Mm-hmm. We were spending one-time money on things that were annual expenses, particularly in health care, and enough people recognized the problem with that. And then tort reform. We were the worst state in the country for lawsuit abuse, according to the Wall Street Journal. So those were the two issues that really pushed me. I immodestly ran with a program called Haley's Plan, and did
you hire a marketing firm for that, or?
But the first three things in Haley's Plan were: 1, tort reform; 2, don't raise anybody's taxes; and 3, get back to fiscal responsibility that is literally true, that we're not faking it.
So you got tort reform.
We did the first year.
You didn't raise taxes.
We never raised taxes except on cigarettes.
Reasonable. And you built the state's rainy day fund that still exists today.
That's right. And
3 for 3.
Well, we did, and we also another thing that wasn't at the top of the list, but I wanted to get more workforce training in our education system.
Yeah, and that is ongoing today. There's some really incredible things.
We got started, but, boy, they have really done great with it.
Former Governor Haley Barbour is our guest. We're going to take a quick time out. We'll come back. We're going to talk national politics, presidential race. This is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi, live from Hobnob. We're at the Mississippi Coliseum. We're back with you right after this. Mississippi, we are coming to you live from the Mississippi Coliseum. Everybody's starting to wake up, got coffee in them. Hobnob 2024, 23rd annual Hobnob put together by the Mississippi Economic Council. I hope you are enjoying the conversation as much as I am with former Governor Haley Barbour. I said we would switch gears to national politics. I hope that's okay on the other side of this break. Divisive is something we were talking about before the break in the current political landscape, Republicans, Democrats, Trump, Harris. We've only got 5 more days of it, and I think there are a lot of people that are relieved. I'm curious with your background in lobbying for as many campaigns as you've been around, chair of the RNC, when you see polling numbers, how much stock do you put in polls? How do you use those to because they're not one size fits all. They don't provide all of the answers. How do you use polling numbers as a tool? And what do you believe when you look at current poll numbers as we're just 5 days from the election?
Well, polling is accurate. I mean, in the profession itself, accurate 96% of the time or 97% of the time. So the first thing you got to remember, some of them are it's not going to be right, and it isn't because they're bad pollsters. It's just because of sample. I want to see multiple polls.
Okay.
I want to see polls that are the most recently taken because polling changes. Polling is a snapshot in time, and one event can change polls by points, particularly in a state.
And no example bigger than what we've seen in the last week, where on Sunday people are going crazy over the comedian making reference to Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage. And then 3 days later, the current president calling Donald Trump supporters garbage. I mean, it's like it swings one way and then it swings right back the other way.
Well, and, of course, the comedian didn't tell anybody he was going to say that. Wasn't in his script. Wasn't in the teleprompter.
But he roasts people for a living. That's what he does.
Right. That's the risk of having somebody like that speak at your event.
That's fair.
Look, I think we know a good bit about what a Trump presidency would be like because we've got one to look at.
Right.
And unfortunately for Kamala Harris, we've got a presidency she's been part of to look at, and the results have been incredibly different. Trump was much, much more successful economically, much more successful in energy policy, much more successful, the Russians didn't invade Ukraine while he was president. They did it while Biden was president. The Hamas didn't invade Israel while Trump was president. Trump is a different breed of cat. But
how much time have you spent around him?
Not that much. I talked to him on the phone occasionally. I've been around him by myself half a dozen times in groups.
Is he different one-on-one privately than he is publicly?
He is.
Is he smarter than he gets credit for?
He's actually very bright. Some things he gets off on tangents about, and that's a weakness that he's got. But he's a bright guy. He's particularly well versed on economics, and I don't agree with his trade policy, but I understand why he says it. I mean, he's saying he's going to threaten all these countries with tariffs. He's not saying I'm going to put tariffs on everybody in the world.
Sure.
And so it's
a bargaining chip, a tool in the toolbox.
That's exactly right. And I think he's a guy comes out of the construction industry, and I think tool in the toolbox is on his mind some of the time.
All right, so I'm going to take you back to your political director days, and I'm going to say you are leading Trump's transition team. We're making the assumption that he wins the election. You are leading his transition team, and he famously made a bunch of appointments that he regretted. He has admitted to that. And so your job is to help him decide on who he is plugging into key cabinet positions. Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Health, Human Services, the key cabinet spots. Give me some names that you think make sense if you were advising President Trump.
Well,
former President Trump, who in this scenario is reelected.
Right. I think we've got some view of what might happen.
Okay.
I think John Paulson, who is a big Wall Street guy and a very terrific economist, is
Treasury.
likely to be Treasury.
Okay.
I think Dr. Carson,
Ben
Ben Carson is likely to be Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Okay.
When you come to national policy, I think Trump feels I think he's going to be very cautious on that. You know, his first Secretary of State was Rex Tillerson, an incredibly successful businessman.
Right.
Chairman of the board of one of the biggest corporations in America, Exxon.
Right.
And it didn't work out. I mean, it wasn't like he was bad. They just didn't gee and haw and didn't work out. I think in those areas that he will be cautious and really dig down deep. There's some governors who are really impressive, like Youngkin in Virginia and
do you think
Sununu in New Hampshire.
Would someone like Glenn Youngkin step away from his post as governor of Virginia to be Secretary of State? Because Virginia's got a unique system with you can't run in consecutive terms, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And he would only have 1 year left in his term. So would he give up 1 year left in his term
to be Secretary of State?
He's got a very good lady lieutenant governor.
Okay.
And so I think if offered, Youngkin would take it because it's right up his alley. I mean, he is a very successful businessman.
Okay. Ran the Carlyle Group, I think?
That's right.
That's right.
He was the chairman of the Carlyle Group, and he's been successful in everything he's ever done.
Secretary of Defense. Who's going to run the military?
This is a place where he's had a hard time. I would be very cautious about trying to predict what he will do because, you know,
But if you're advising him, not predicting the route that he would go, but
if I were advising him, I would advise him to reach into the United States Senate and take one of the proven defense
is that
committee.
Tom Cotton?
Probably not.
I mean, I'm putting words in your mouth.
Right.
I'm just trying to kind of think who.
I hadn't thought about it because I didn't know we were going to do this.
Well, that's my fault for springing this on you.
Yeah, but
what about Chief of Staff? You know how important that position is, whether you're talking about governor, president. Is it just simply somebody you trust, or does it have to be somebody that is extremely savvy politically?
Yes, the latter.
Okay.
But also extremely savvy with Congress. And that's why I think a candidate is going to be the former Speaker of the House from California.
Okay.
Who, got kicked out by the Republicans.
Right.
But has proven himself out of speakership how effective he is and how much he's done to help the campaigns. And so McCarthy is, I think.
That's a really interesting choice.
Yeah, but don't forget, a big in our system of government, a big part of life is how the administration can work with the Congress. Ronald Reagan, we were talking about, never had a Republican majority in the House, never, not one day. Yet we passed the 81 economic reform, we passed Social Security reform, we taxed immigration reform, and we passed the 86 tax bill, all with a divided Congress, because Ronald Reagan got it.
It was a Congress that was different. I mean, there was a willingness to work together. I mean, you kind of told that story a moment ago when you talked about Reagan and Tip O'Neill kind of working together at that level. But, I mean...
Well, you had also, you back then still had some blue dog Democrats. I remember Sonny Montgomery when I was
Which today would be Republicans.
That's exactly right. When I was chairman and Sonny was still in the Congress, I asked him to change parties, and he said he wasn't going to run again. He just didn't feel right about changing parties. He said, you know, when I came to Congress, there were 125 Southern Democrats. Now there's not a Dixie dozen.
Wow. What a great quote from a great man and a great leader, which could describe you as well. Governor Barbour, thank you so much for your time. I enjoy these conversations and appreciate you being generous with your time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for being part of Hobnob.
Governor Haley Barbour, this is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk, Mississippi. We'll take a quick time out. We'll wrap it up with you when we come back. Hobnob 2024 at the Mississippi Coliseum. One last time, we welcome you to the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk, Mississippi, coming to you from Hobnob. And it is, there's a good crowd going. They heard breakfast was here, and it was good. The coffee was hot, and they'd get to shake hands and maybe take a picture with Scott Waller, who, by the way, has turned into a producer. I mean, he's directing traffic on cameras and where things are supposed to be. Thank you for having us. This has been, it's my first Hobnob. And really, really cool event.
Well, the partnership we have with SuperTalk is so important and so special, and the things we've worked on through the years, it's really going to continue us to allow us to do good things for the state of Mississippi. So we're very excited about y'all being here.
We talked with you about themes, theme for MEC, but as you anticipate some of the speakers that we're going to hear from today, whether it's Senator Wicker, Commissioner Gibson, any of the other speakers, what do you expect to hear from them, especially 5 days from a national election?
Well, I think we'll hear a little bit about the national election, especially from Senator Wicker and his challenger. But I think at the end of the day, I think what we hope to hear is what are we going to be doing to think about the future of our state? And I think that's where this event is always a great event, because it comes right before an election, and even with a year where this year's a national election, last year was a statewide election, it's a chance to talk about what we need to do to move not only our state but our country forward in a way that provides opportunities for our citizens here in Mississippi. Our goal at MEC as the state chamber is to really create an environment where people want to be here, want to set up businesses here. We really are focusing on how to keep more young professionals in the state of Mississippi, and creating those pathways, particularly coming out of K-12 into community college and university systems, to get them into majors that are going to lead to jobs here in Mississippi. And if we can do that, that's how we really continue to build our state, because, at some point, those of us that are getting a little thinner and grayer are going to be moving on, and we got to make sure we've got.
I got a few more of those popping up on like a daily basis.
We got to make sure we got really strong talent coming in and following up. So
you are savvy enough to handle this question that I'm going to throw at you. I hope. I'm not trying to throw you under the bus at all. We've heard differences of opinions on state income tax from Lieutenant Governor Hoseman, from Speaker of the House White. Obviously, I'm not sure that they are quite as far apart as a lot of people, and maybe even they think they are from each other. In terms of the business climate for the state of Mississippi, how important is a complete elimination of the income tax versus an approach that is very much centered on paying down debt, balancing budget, not over-promising?
Well, I think it's twofold. You kind of got to do both at the same time. And I know that sounds like a typical political answer, right?
Yeah, it is.
But let me just tell you, what we want to do is we want to work and figure out, okay, what are the unintended consequences of any type of legislation? It doesn't matter.
That was, would you like this pie or this cake? And you said thank you.
Right. So exactly. But you want. But how is it that you can have the pie and the cake? Because you can't have them both if there's not something else that you're giving up.
Okay. And
I think that's where, as we get into this and you look at it from a standpoint of, number one, what is our competitiveness state with what's happening around the country on this issue? A lot of states are taking it on. A lot of states are focusing on how do we get to zero at some point. But in states that already have it, we need to really spend a lot of time figuring out, okay, what is it that's driving the economy? Because you can't run government without money at the end of the day. So I think as we do this, and I applaud both the speaker for actually bringing this topic to the forefront in a forum that he did a couple of months ago. I also applaud the I guess conservative, cautious approach. Now I know you said you're going to not throw me under the bus, so just don't get too upset with me when I'm sort of vague. But at the end of the day, I think there's still a lot of research that has to take place, because where we are with it is, if our ultimate goal is to eliminate it, how do we do that and how do we replace it? And I think that's what we've got to really focus our attention on.
Well, and if you think about Tennessee, Texas, Florida, three states in our region of the country that don't have state income tax, there's some pretty significant differences between those three states and the state of Mississippi. Right. And I think in a lot of ways we've got to embrace the fact that there's some uniqueness, but also recognize that we don't have the same size cities or the same size industry bases. Maybe we're striving for that.
Right.
I don't think we want to be exactly any of those three states.
And I think where that comes in my opinion, is, okay, what is it that we're trying to get to? Because one, I mentioned young professionals earlier. We've got to create an environment that they want to come here, they want to stay here. And if we do that, then that's going to increase the opportunities to get where we want to be. So I think you've got to look at it holistically. You can't just say, okay, this is the one thing we're going to do. And no, we've got to look at it holistically. What does it mean for business development? What does it mean for business growth? What does it mean for population? And if we do all of those things and say, okay, if we take these steps incrementally, I think we can get there. It's just a matter of it's not going to happen overnight. But that's okay. I think where we're headed right now, we're in a good position. We're slowly moving toward the 4%, and we're still seeing revenue.
Sure.
So I think we got an opportunity to do something special.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank y'all for being here.
Been a wonderful day.
Looking forward to a great day.
Full day of Super Talk Mississippi. Gerard at 10, Rebecca at 2. Sports Talk this afternoon starting at 3. My thanks to Alex and Houston. They make everything happen when we're on the road. For Scott Waller and his entire MEC team, and for all of our guests, I'm Richard Cross. Thanks for being with us. The Gallo Radio Show on Super Talk Mississippi. Thanks, Lance.